All right, settle down, people. I know, it looks like something out of a Bond movie, but trust me, the only villains here wear sensible cardigans and wield laminated bylaws like ninja stars. That's me, yelling over the deafening whoomp 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 of the rotor blades as a sleek black helicopter settled onto my meticulously manicured front lawn. Or, I should say, what was my meticulously manicured front lawn? Turns out, a Bell 429 doesn't exactly do wonders for Kentucky bluegrass. Dust and finely chopped azalea petals swirled around us like a bizarre, high-octane snow globe. A gaggle of my equally bewildered and scandalized neighbors stood at the edge of their pristine driveways, looking like they'd just witnessed a unicorn spontaneously combust. Which, considering the usual excitement level in Serenity Peaks peaked with Mrs. Henderson's prize-winning petunias, wasn't far off. The side door of the chopper slid open, and a burly guy in a bright orange vest hopped out, followed by another and another, all lugging serious-looking backpacks and equipment. These weren't your typical Sunday afternoon sightseers. These were the County Search and Rescue Team, and they looked as surprised to be landing on suburban turf as my neighbors looked to see them. "Forget the SUV. I'm airlifting you in," I bellowed again, pointing towards the distant, ominous clouds gathering over Blackwood Canyon. Chief Miller, the head of the SAR team, a man whose face looked permanently etched with the weariness of 1,000 near misses, just stared at me for a beat, a mixture of disbelief and dawning comprehension in his eyes. Then, a slow grin spread across his weathered face. He clapped me on the shoulder, a gesture that felt surprisingly weighty, and barked orders at his team. And that, my friends, is how a 9-foot-tall abstract metal sculpture named The Amalgamation, a petty turf war over lawn aesthetics, and a woman whose dedication to beige knew no bounds, led to me using a helicopter like an Uber XL for emergency services. But to truly appreciate the sheer, unadulterated absurdity of this situation, we need to rewind. Way back, to the moment I made the colossal mistake of thinking I could escape the tech world's relentless chaos by buying a ridiculously overpriced house in a gated community where the biggest crime was probably someone leaving their recycling bin out a day early. My exit from the digital realm was, if I do say so myself, rather spectacular. I'd created an AI that, and try to keep a straight face here, optimized cheese aging for artisanal creameries. Yeah, I know. Niche doesn't even begin to cover it. But apparently there's a whole secret society of cheese aficionados who are willing to pay top dollar for perfectly ripened Gouda, and my algorithm was their holy grail. So at the ripe old age of 32, I found myself in possession of more money than I knew what to do with, and a burning desire to do absolutely nothing of consequence. Serenity Peaks seemed like the perfect antidote to a life spent staring at lines of code. Picture this: rolling hills, manicured lawns that looked like they were vacuumed daily, and an eerie silence broken only by the gentle whirring of sprinkler systems. It was Stepford Wives meets Better Homes and Gardens, and for a brief, delusional period, I thought I could fit in. Be one of the beige, enjoy the tranquility, maybe even take up golf. The house itself was excessive. 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, because apparently you need more toilets than people, and a backyard that sloped down to the edge of Blackwood Canyon, offering a stunning view that was unfortunately marred by the nagging feeling that I was living in a very expensive, very restrictive outdoor museum. The first sign that I might have made a grave error came with the welcome packet from the Serenity Peaks Homeowners Association. It was less a packet and more a small novel, bound in a shade of off-white, so aggressively bland it felt like an insult to the entire color spectrum. Inside, nestled amongst pages detailing approved mailbox designs and the precise acceptable height of lawn grass, 2.5 inches, not a millimeter more or less, was the legendary Bylaw 74C, subsection 8, the one that would become the bane of my existence. All lawn ornaments must not exceed 36 inches in height and must be of a pre-approved pastoral theme, for example, gnomes, flamingos, faux marble bird baths. I remember reading that and actually laughing out loud. Gnomes? Flamingos? I'd spent my adult life creating cutting-edge technology, and now I was being told my landscaping options were limited to the decorative preferences of suburban retirees. The absurdity was almost charming. Almost. My first act of rebellion, my opening salvo in the Cold War of Serenity Peaks, came in the form of the amalgamation. I'd commissioned it from a local artist, a wonderfully eccentric woman named Agnes, who specialized in turning scrap metal into thought-provoking, and occasionally terrifying, sculptures. The amalgamation was her magnum opus, a chaotic yet harmonious explosion of polished chrome intertwined with rusted iron, standing a proud 9 feet tall. It was beautiful, it was unique, and it was about as pastoral as a heavy metal concert. I unveiled my plan to Leo, my best friend, and the only person who truly understood my particular brand of low-key anarchy during one of our regular video calls. He took one look at the digital rendering of the amalgamation and burst out laughing so hard he snorted his coffee. "Dude," he wheezed, wiping tears from his eyes, "you're gonna get eaten alive by the HOA." "Nah," I said, with the naive optimism of someone who had yet to truly grasp the iron fist of suburban governance. "It's my property. What are they gonna do? Send me passive-aggressive emails?" Oh, sweet summer child. If only I knew the depths of passive aggression that Brenda Vickers, president for life of the Serenity Peaks HOA, was capable of. The sculpture arrived on a flatbed truck one sunny Tuesday morning. Sal and Manny, the 2 contractors I'd hired for the installation, looked at it with the kind of deadpan expressions that suggested they'd seen far weirder things in their line of work, which, knowing the clientele in this area, was probably true. Before they even had a chance to maneuver the amalgamation off the truck, I found it. A crisp, laminated notice stuck to my front door, glinting menacingly in the sunlight. It was from the Architectural Review Committee, citing Bylaw 74C, subsection 8, in bold underlined letters. Below it was a sharp, almost accusatory signature: Brenda Vickers, HOA President. This, I realized, was war. A very polite, meticulously documented war, but a war nonetheless. I decided to take the diplomatic route, swallow my pride, put on my most reasonable face, and try to explain that the amalgamation was art, not just some oversized lawn gnome gone rogue. I walked over to Brenda's house, a beige monstrosity that looked like it had been designed by an algorithm that prioritized conformity over comfort. She was in her front yard, meticulously pruning roses that were, you guessed it, a very specific shade of pale pink, approved by the HOA landscaping guidelines. She didn't even look up when I approached. "Mrs. Vickers?" I began, trying to keep my tone neutral. "It's President Vickers," she corrected, her voice as sharp and brittle as dry leaves. "Right, President Vickers? I'm Alex." "Yes, Mr." She made a theatrical pause, as if my last name had momentarily slipped her mind, though I suspected she knew it perfectly well and was just enjoying the power play. "The new resident on Lot 12. I believe there might be a misunderstanding regarding my lawn art." She finally looked up. Her eyes, the color of a stormy sky, narrowed slightly as they scanned me from my, admittedly slightly rumpled linen shirt to my perfectly acceptable, non-HOA violating loafers. Then her gaze flicked towards my property. I could practically see her mentally calculating the precise number of bylaws my mere existence was likely to violate. "There is no misunderstanding, mister," she repeated, with a deliberate emphasis on the hesitation. "The bylaws are quite clear. All landscaping modifications, including decorative elements, must adhere to the pre-approved guidelines. And I can assure you," she said, her voice dripping with condescension, "that your installation does not—" I tried to explain my artistic vision. A mistake, I realized immediately. I talked about the juxtaposition of textures, the commentary on the modern world, the sheer aesthetic pleasure of a 9-foot chunk of welded metal. Brenda listened with a glacial politeness, occasionally interjecting with phrases like community harmony and maintaining property values. "Mister," she finally said, snipping a perfectly healthy rose with unnecessary force, "this is Serenity Peaks. We have standards. We don't want that," lowering the tone. "It's industrial. It belongs in a junkyard, not a respectable neighborhood." The veiled threat of fines hung in the air like the scent of her overly perfumed roses. I left, the pleasant facade of suburban tranquility shattered. I wasn't dealing with a reasonable person. I was dealing with a zealot, a tin-pot dictator of perfectly manicured lawns, and the amalgamation had become her personal Mount Everest of bureaucratic opposition. So, naturally, I doubled down. If it was war she wanted, it was war she would get. I instructed Sal and Manny to proceed with the installation. They shrugged, unfazed by the brewing suburban drama. "So," Sal drawled, chewing on his ever-present toothpick as he surveyed the concrete base they'd just poured, "this thing's gonna piss some people off, huh?" "That's the general idea," I replied, a small, rebellious thrill coursing through me. Manny, a man of few words, just grunted in approval. Over the next day, as Sal and Manny wrestled the unwieldy sculpture into place, the tension in Serenity Peaks was thicker than the humidity. Brenda was a constant presence, watching from her window with binoculars, occasionally venturing out to take photographs with her phone, presumably to document every minute infraction for her ever-growing file on the amalgamation. It was during this period of escalating absurdity that I first heard the news report. I was on my back deck, trying to enjoy the stunning view of Blackwood Canyon while simultaneously ignoring Brenda's hawk-like surveillance, when a snippet of a local news broadcast drifted over from a neighbor's open window. Something about the treacherous terrain of the canyon, how easy it was for hikers to get lost, especially with the unpredictable weather patterns we'd been having. They even mentioned a search and rescue operation a few weeks prior. The seed of the future crisis was unknowingly planted. The day after the amalgamation was finally, defiantly bolted into its concrete base, the community-wide alert buzzed on everyone's phones. A local teenager, the son of the wealthy and influential Hendersons, of the prize-winning Petunias, had gone missing while trail running in Blackwood Canyon. A storm was forecast to hit within hours, turning what was already a dangerous situation into a potentially fatal one. The atmosphere in Serenity Peaks shifted instantly from petty squabbling over lawn ornaments to a collective anxious hum. Even Brenda looked momentarily perturbed. Then came the sound of the approaching rescue. A large, official-looking Ford Expedition, emblazoned with the county search and rescue insignia, pulled up to the main gate of Serenity Peaks. Chief Miller was in the passenger seat, his brow furrowed as he studied a map. This was the most direct access point to the trailhead where young Tim Henderson had last been seen. The gate guard, a perpetually nervous teenager named Jeremy, who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on Earth, dutifully radioed Brenda as per protocol for any unscheduled commercial-grade vehicle. Apparently, in Serenity Peaks, saving a life took a back seat to preserving the sanctity of their precious asphalt. I was outside, talking to Sal and Manny about the final touches on the sculpture's base, when I saw the SR truck stop abruptly at the gate. A moment later, I saw the reason why. Brenda Vickers, in her souped-up golf cart, another HOA-approved vehicle, naturally, in a tasteful shade of beige, rolled up and parked it with deliberate precision directly in front of the SR SUV, effectively blocking their entry. I swear you couldn't have scripted a more perfect villain moment if you tried. I walked over, a morbid sense of fascination mixed with growing outrage bubbling inside me. Chief Miller was leaning out of his window, his face a mask of incredulous frustration. "Ma'am," he said, his voice strained but still trying to maintain a professional level of patience. "We're with County Search and Rescue. We have a missing kid in Blackwood Canyon, and a major storm is about to hit. We need to get through now." Brenda, perched regally on the seat of her golf cart, held up a well-worn copy of the HOA binder, like a shield. "I appreciate the situation, Chief," she said, her tone saccharine sweet, but with an underlying steeliness that sent a shiver of unpleasant recognition down my spine. "But Bylaw 14A is quite explicit. No commercial or government vehicles exceeding 1 ton are permitted on Serenity Peaks roads without 72 hours prior written application to the board. The pavers are Italian, you see, and they crack." Chief Miller stared at her as if she'd just sprouted a second head. "Are you serious? A child's life is potentially at stake, and you're worried about your pavers?" "Community infrastructure is paramount," Brenda declared, as if that settled the matter. "There's a public access road just 3 miles west. It's perfectly adequate." "Adequate?" Miller exploded, his remaining patience finally snapping. "That's a 5-mile detour. It'll cost us at least 45 minutes we don't have. Every minute counts when someone's lost in that terrain, especially with this storm coming in." I stepped forward, unable to stay silent any longer. "Brenda, for God's sake, it's a kid! A neighbor's kid. Surely even you can see that this is more important than some ridiculous bylaw?" She turned her gaze on me, her eyes like chips of ice. "You, of all people, mister, have no respect for the rules. Your grotesque lawn ornament is a testament to that. This is exactly the kind of chaos I'm trying to prevent by upholding our community standards." The sheer, unadulterated pettiness of it was staggering. Here was a life-or-death situation, and she was more concerned with her precious pavers and her petty vendetta against my non-pastoral sculpture. Someone, probably one of the increasingly agitated neighbors who had gathered to witness this surreal standoff, had called the police. Soon, a patrol car pulled up, lights flashing. Sergeant Chen, a veteran officer with the weary eyes of someone who had seen it all, and probably then some, stepped out, followed by a young, eager-looking rookie, Officer Davies. Chen listened to Chief Miller's increasingly frantic explanation, then turned to Brenda, his expression unreadable. Davies, however, looked like he couldn't believe what he was hearing. "But sir," Davies said to Chen, his voice full of youthful indignation, "it's an emergency. Surely we can compel her to move." Chen sighed, rubbing his temples. "It's a private road on private property, Davies. Legally, she's the authority here. Monumentally stupid, yes. Incredibly short-sighted and morally reprehensible? Absolutely. But breaking a state law by being a colossal pain in the ass? Unfortunately not. We can't technically force her, Chief." Chief Miller looked utterly defeated. He was on his radio, getting increasingly grim updates about the approaching storm and the dwindling daylight. The golden hour for finding Tim Henderson was rapidly closing. Brenda, meanwhile, stood by her golf cart, arms crossed, a smug expression plastered across her face, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of the situation. And that's when it hit me. The sheer, unadulterated absurdity of it all. The bureaucratic paralysis. Brenda's insane power trip. The genuine danger to a young boy. All because of some ridiculous rules about road weight limits. I looked at my house, my ridiculous, unearned wealth, and then at the amalgamation, standing tall and defiant on my lawn. And a thought, a truly glorious, screw you money kind of thought, sparked in my brain. I walked calmly over to Chief Miller, who was now practically vibrating with frustration. "Chief," I said, trying to keep my voice even over the rising wind, "forgive me for asking, but how does your team feel about heights?" He looked at me, a mixture of confusion and utter exasperation on his face. "What? Son, I don't have time for games." "I'm not playing. Your SUV is grounded, but I have a vehicle that doesn't need roads. Give me 2 minutes." I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the one labeled Jack's Chopper. I pressed call. "Hey, Jax, you busy?" I asked, trying to sound casual despite the adrenaline surging through me. There was a pause, then Jax's laconic voice on the other end. "Depends. What kind of busy?" "No, not Napa this time," I said, glancing pointedly at Brenda. "I need a pickup at my place. ASAP. Passengers and gear. It's a civic matter." Another pause. Then, "Civic matter involving your, yard art?" Jax had a talent for understatement. "Something like that," I replied. "And yeah, light the fires." I hung up and turned to Sergeant Chen, who was watching me with a wary curiosity. "Sergeant," I said, "you might want to clear the area around my lawn. Just a precaution." Chen looked at me, a slow dawn of understanding, and maybe even a flicker of amusement in his eyes. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod to Officer Davies, who looked utterly lost, but followed his senior officer's lead. Brenda scoffed. "What are you going to do, mister? Have your little metal monster towed away by a crane?" I just smiled, a wide, slightly manic grin. "Something like that." Then we heard it. A faint thump, thump, thump in the distance. Everyone froze, the tension in the air suddenly electric. The sound grew louder, closer, an unmistakable concussive roar that drowned out the rising wind. It was the unmistakable sound of a helicopter. A sleek, black Bell 429, looking impossibly out of place in the perfectly beige landscape of Serenity Peaks, crested the ridge of Blackwood Canyon and began its descent towards my house. The wind from the rotors was immense, whipping up dust and debris, sending Brenda's meticulously organized paperwork scattering across the pristine asphalt. Her perfectly coiffed hair became a chaotic halo around her stunned face. Sal and Manny, those unflappable titans of the construction world, simply looked up from their work on the sculpture's base, took a contemplative bite of their sandwiches, and exchanged a knowing glance. This, even for them, was a new level of rich people crazy. The helicopter touched down with surprising grace on my front lawn, mere feet from the amalgamation, and, in a moment of poetic justice that I couldn't have planned better if I tried, right on the property line, its skids crushing a prize-winning row of Brenda's meticulously manicured azaleas. "Forget the SUV," I yelled again, the wind buffeting my face, gesturing wildly towards the open door of the helicopter. "I'm airlifting you in." Chief Miller's stunned expression melted away, replaced by a look of pure, unadulterated gratitude. He clapped me on the shoulder again, this time with a force that nearly knocked me off my feet, and roared, "Let's go! Move, move, move!" The SR team, professionals to the core, didn't hesitate. They grabbed their gear from the still idling SUV and sprinted towards the waiting helicopter. In what felt like seconds, they were all aboard. Chief Miller gave me one last nod, a silent promise of thanks in his eyes, and then he too was gone. The helicopter lifted off, the roar of its engines filling the suddenly silent neighborhood. It banked hard, the downdraft swirling around Brenda, who stood by her golf cart, mouth agape, her rule book clutched uselessly in her hand. Her reign of terror, her carefully constructed world of beige conformity, had just been completely and utterly bypassed by the sheer, unadulterated power of a very large bank account and a complete lack of respect for petty rules in the face of a genuine crisis. As the helicopter disappeared over the canyon ridge, leaving a cloud of dust and a profound sense of surrealism in its wake, Sergeant Chen walked calmly over to Brenda, who was now sputtering like a faulty engine. "Well, Brenda," he said, a hint of amusement dancing in his eyes. "Looks like the situation is resolved. No bylaws against air travel, are there?" He couldn't quite suppress a grin. He then proceeded to write a police report that, while meticulously factual, managed to conveniently overlook Brenda's role in obstructing the rescue effort, instead focusing on the timely and life-saving intervention of a private citizen. Sal and Manny, completely unfazed by the airborne spectacle, finally finished securing the amalgamation to its base. Standing tall and proud against the backdrop of the now slightly less pristine landscape, it looked less like a piece of abstract art and more like a monument to triumphant absurdity. "Kid's got style," Sal muttered, taking another bite of his sandwich. "Yep," Manny agreed, his single word carrying the weight of profound understanding. Later that evening, the news broke. Tim Henderson had been found, cold and scared but alive, in a difficult-to-reach ravine. The news anchor specifically credited the rapid deployment of the search and rescue team, facilitated by a private helicopter, for the successful rescue just before the full force of the storm hit. There was no mention of a certain HOA president and her unwavering commitment to Italian pavers. The fallout in Serenity Peaks was biblical. Brenda, predictably, called an emergency HOA meeting, her voice trembling with outrage as she demanded that I be fined into oblivion and possibly excommunicated for endangering the community with my reckless helicopter stunt. But the narrative had shifted. The Hendersons, their faces etched with gratitude, were at the meeting, profusely thanking me. Other residents, people who had quietly chafed under Brenda's iron rule for years, now saw her for what she was. A petty tyrant whose obsession with control had nearly cost a boy his life. The vote to censure me failed spectacularly. Instead, a motion was raised to review Brenda's presidency. The air in the clubhouse, usually thick with the scent of stale coffee and unspoken resentments, crackled with a newfound defiance. Her reign of beige terror was over. A week later, Serenity Peaks was still buzzing, though the tone had changed. There was a lightness in the air, a sense of release from the oppressive weight of the bylaws. I was sitting on my porch, enjoying the late afternoon sun glinting off the amalgamation, when Sergeant Chen, now off duty and looking surprisingly relaxed in jeans and a t-shirt, came by. "Just wanted to say thanks," he said, extending a hand. "That was something else. You probably saved that kid's life." We shook hands, a silent understanding passing between us. He chuckled. "And you definitely gave Brenda something to think about." A few days after that, a massive, ridiculously extravagant, edible arrangement arrived, courtesy of the Henderson family. It was so large it practically required its own zoning permit. Life in Serenity Peaks would never be truly normal again, and frankly, I didn't want it to be. I'd come here seeking peace and quiet, but I'd found something far more interesting. A community, albeit a slightly unhinged one, that had, in its own bizarre way, rallied around a moment of true crisis. And I, the outsider, the rule breaker with the offensive lawn art, had somehow become a part of it. I sat on my porch that evening, the faint scent of crushed azaleas still lingering in the air. The amalgamation gleamed in the moonlight, a silent sentinel against the encroaching darkness. I looked up at the sky, now clear and filled with stars, and a thought occurred to me. I'm thinking of getting a helipad installed, I murmured to myself, taking a sip of my drink. I wonder if there's a bylaw for that. A smile spread across my face. Finally, I felt like I was home, and I had a feeling that the next HOA meeting was going to be very, very interesting. The Cold War of Serenity Peaks, it seemed, had just entered a whole new, gloriously absurd phase, and this time I had air support.